Mr. Pepperman.
Okay. I'll go on, Your Honor. I'm going to do my best here. Judge, I don't profess to be a chemist. If we were asking the court to grant a motion declaring me a chemist, then we'd certainly lose that motion. But that's not the motion. That's not the issue. The issue before the court is very simple and straightforward. It's whether Dr. Babcock conducted his testing under conditions substantially similar to those that existed at Real Water. Now, I agree with the court. Dr. Babcock's testing is not relevant to our claims. It isn't. That's argument number one in the motion.
Well, I saw it there, and I still keep coming back to that. How is it relevant? I mean, you have the video. We know the meat. And I don't think there's any allegations regarding, once again, defective product based upon design and or manufacturing.
Right. I mean, there's no design defect. It's in the traditional sense. I mean, we allege that this meter was unreasonably dangerous for the purpose. And
no, I get that. That's all goes to the warnings and all those things. That's a different issue.
But Mr. Rasmussen, I think you asked him several times, how is this relevant? I don't know that he ever provided you with an answer, but our position is it's not relevant. But even if there was some sort of tangential relevance, which I have yet to hear from Mr. Rasmussen, then it doesn't matter because it's not substantially similar. That is the simple question. If you're going to do out-of-court testing, you have to do it under substantially similar circumstances to those that existed at Real Water. If you don't, the testing and the opinions are speculative, unreliable, and inadmissible. Nevada law is clear on this. And this is Nevada Supreme Court from Wren v. State, 89 Nevada 71. Quote, the conditions of the out-of-court experiment should be substantially similar to those prevailing at the time of the incident and issue before opinion testimony based thereon is admissible. Unquote. That's the rule. It's a black letter rule in this. If you're going to rely on out-of-court testing in a circumstance like this to replicate the issue at the incident at issue, it has to be substantially similar. If it's not, it's inadmissible. And the Wren case, that rule is cited by Hallmark, footnote 23 in the seminal opinion on expert admissibility, and it's clear as day. And that a lot was said, but very little was said about the issue before the court. Now, our motion laid out several fatal differences between the conditions of Dr. Babcock's testing and the out-of-court testing, Dr. Babcock's out-of-court testing and those prevailing at the time Real Water was making water. Now, my argument focused on the two big ones. They didn't use the same meters or probes with the same probes that were used by Real Water, and they didn't use a test solution with a comparable negative ORP range. Mr. Rasmussen, again, said a lot, but he did not meaningfully address either issue. With respect to the different test meters and probes, Mr. Rasmussen's argument is essentially to dismiss those differences by simply asserting that the test meters were all the same model as the meters used at Real Water. But Dr. Babcock himself testified that there were differences between his 15 test meters that invalidated his results on 2 of the meters. Mr. Rasmussen, for the first time, in his argument says, well, of course 2 of the meters had older probes. That was intentional. We did that on purpose. We wanted to see how that would be different. Well, Mr. Rasmussen can say that, but his testimony is not evidence. And I showed the court at the last hearing, and Chris, if we can pull up the motion, page 9. That's not what happened. There was no discussion about this. They didn't intentionally send the 2 older probes. They didn't talk about this in advance. They sent the 15 meters with the 15 probes, and 2 of them got outlier results, and they were confused by it. I said, well, hey, why are we getting different results with these 2 meters? Dr. Babcock did a detailed comparison. He analyzed the differences between the outlier probes and the other probes. He did a side-by-side comparison. We looked at the figure. He spoke to Mr. Rasmussen about it. And this is what he testified to, Your Honor, when he said that. When he said, I got these different results with the two outlier meters, I asked him, did you do anything to inquire into why the data from these 2 meters were inconsistent? He didn't say, oh, that was on purpose. They sent me 2 old probes. We were testing it. We knew we expected them to maybe be different. He said, no. He said, well, I spoke to Mr. Rasmussen about this. We looked at the 2 probes for the 2 meters that had the data that were outliers. And based on the construction of the probes and the serial numbers that were on the probes, it was relayed to me that these probes were older and had been manufactured in a different location where they may have been affected by exposure to colder temperatures during shipping that can affect the way they perform. That's what happened. They did the testing, they got 2 outlier results, and they started looking into it, and they compared it, and they determined that the 2 outlier probes were older. And they were different. The real water meters...
I think I read somewhere there were different manufacturing facilities or locations for the probes.
They were manufactured at a different facility. They're older based on the serial numbers, and that age and the manufacturing time resulted in changes in the probes that affected the test results. So just to be clear on the timeline here, you have the 2 outlier meters that were manufactured earlier in time than the other 13, and you're getting different test results based on the 2 meters, and they're throwing out the older meters. But the real water meters were even older than the 2 outlier meters. So if the results from the 2 older probes are thrown out as outliers because they are not substantially similar to the newer test meters, how can they say that the Kemp test results apply to even the older white meters used at real water? It doesn't make sense. You'd think the older meters would be, you'd at least say those are maybe similar, but to just ignore the fact that you threw out the older meters of the test meters, it's just speculation to say that what the real water meters are similar to. It's like testing the time it takes a 2024 Mustang to drive a half mile and applying the results to a 1964 Mustang. It's the same model, maybe they're the same color, but they're older. You can't take the test results from a newer model and apply it to an older model. That's what they're doing here. The argument on Friday, there was a comment that we're saying that the black test meters are bad and the white meters at real water are good. We're not saying that. We're saying that they're different. And there's no reason that Hanna and Dr. Babcock could not have tested the older white meters. Look, we have an older white meter right here. We bought it online. That we found it. White meter has the blue probe, different from the black meter with the green probe. Older model. So is it not possible that Dr. Babcock and Hanna couldn't have tested the similar meters? At a minimum, they could have matched up the serial numbers, which they didn't do. Chris, can you pull up that picture from the... So up on the screen is an exhibit to one of the other motions that Hanna filed. And basically at some point after the reports were issued, I believe it was in June, Hanna asked to inspect the real water meters that we had in the joint storage facility. So we went out there, they went there and they took some pictures, and this is one of the pictures of the meters that we collected from real water and have stored. There's a serial number right there. Dr. Babcock still never looked at the meters that we have in the storage, but he looked at these pictures. They had access to these meters. They could have seen the serial numbers. They could have determined when were the meters that we actually collected from real water manufactured? How old were they? He could have looked at the probes. He could have compared them like he did his 2 test meters in his report, but he did none of that. He did not compare. He did not even bother to look at the test meters to compare them to the real water meters. He just wants to apply the test results as if they're the same. There's no foundation for that. And you don't have to take my word for it. This is Dr. Babcock's testimony. Let me pull the volume 1, put up the volume 1 deposition, page 94, please, Chris. So if we start at line 2, I ask him, the Milwaukee 500 meters that were actually used by Real Water to manufacture its products, did you determine whether they were manufactured at a different time than any of the Milwaukee test meters that you used? Answer, I don't know when these meters like this one shown in the exhibit, I was showing them one of the Real Water white meters, I don't know exactly when those were manufactured. Question, did you do any comparison of the actual meters used in the test meters? Answer, no. Question, did you do any comparison of the probe styles? Answer, no. Are you able to say whether there are any meters, any differences between the Real Water meters actually used and the Milwaukee test meters? Answer, Milwaukee test meters, you mean the ones I used for my testing? Question, or yes. Just the testimony that I recall that the design hadn't changed. I mean, the construction hadn't changed. It was just more of a visual appearance change. Go to 95, Chris. Again, he's just saying, well, I assume there's no differences. That's what they told me. But that begged the question. Well, there were differences in the 15 Milwaukee test meters that you used. 13 of them were one way and 2 were different, right? Answer, of the probes. Yeah, the probes and 2 of them had a different appearance than the other 13. Question, they had a different appearance and they had a different manufacturing time, correct? Answer, I believe so. That's my understanding. They were manufactured at a different plants under different conditions that affected the performance of the meters, correct? Yes. Yeah, they were manufactured in different plants, different conditions.
Did anyone ever determine the probes that resulted in the 2 different, the different readings from the other probes to determine whether or not they were similar to the probes that were being utilized at or around the time of this event? Anybody check that?
No, that's what this is right here.
Well, we'll get to that. I'll make sure that what he just said is wrong. We know exactly which probes were sent to Real Water. But does Dr. Babcock know all the manufacturing and the serial numbers? No. But we have people that will be testifying as exactly what was sent to Real Water.
Well, you don't lay that on the expert. Lay that on people that would know in the sales department what was sent.
Oh, no, that actually goes to a foundational issue.
And we have that foundation.
Can you go back to page 94, Chris? Lines 13 through 15. Mr. Rasmussen's argument is not evidence or testimony.
Well, that's why I said it goes to foundation.
This is the evidence or testimony. I was asking him that. Did you do the comparison? Did you do any comparison of the probe size? Answer, no. He did not compare the probes on the test meters, any of them, to the probes on the actual Real Water meters, which we have.
Well, here's my question. It's actually slightly different than that. We know we have one batch of meters, I guess, that contain the same style probe. Then we know we have that was used as part of the testing. Then we had the 2 outlier probes, right? So my question would be this: were the 2 outlier probes the same as the probes that were being utilized by Real Water at or around the time of this event?
They don't know. They did not do the comparison. They don't have the foundation to say these are the same. They can only speculate to say, but here's the problem with that, Judge. So they have the 13 meters that were manufactured the latest in time, the most recently. Those were different from the 2 outlier meters. They compared those. They compared the probes of the 13 meters to the 2 outlier meters. Those probes were different. They were both the black meters, they were both the green probes, but they were different. They had differences. And then they said, why are these 2 outlier meters different? And so they compared them and they said, oh, they're older. They're older probes, so we're going to throw them out. We're just going to go with the data from the 13 newer probes. But the real water probes, they didn't do any comparison to either the 13 or the 2, but they're seeking to apply the test results from the 13 newest meters to the real water meters, even though the real water meters are even older than the 2 outlier meters. It makes no sense, but let alone adequate foundation to let this guy come in and start speculating about how the test results apply to probe styles he's never looked at. So that's the problem here with the meters. They're different probes. He did his testing on different probe styles and didn't do it on the same ones and didn't do anything to say that these test results would apply to that. That's the speculation. That's why Hallmark says it's got to be substantially similar. If there are these differences and you can't account for the differences in terms of how your test results would apply, your opinions on the test results it's speculation, it's conjecture. You don't know that they apply to the actual conditions of the incident. That's the whole problem with this. That's why, regardless of the
other than the older probes, the 2 that were different, or had different results, I should say, and different probe styles, why did he eliminate those? I'm just trying to figure out what was the reason, what was the justification for eliminating that data?
He said that that data was a statistical outlier because I think the other 13, there was more of them. There were more of the newer probes, so we threw out the 2 older probes because there was fewer. I'm sure if there were more older probes, you would have threw out the newer probes as statistical outliers. So separate and apart from...
Well, here's the thing, and Mr. Rasmussen, Milwaukee Instruments had control of the probes. In this respect, I would anticipate they have inventory, number one, because they have access to these. Why didn't they utilize meters that had the same probes that were utilized or being used by real water?
They're exactly the same kind of probe you're on, exactly the same probe, manufactured in the same place. Okay? And we'll show you what the problem is here, because it's really has to do with what Mr. Pepperman wants me to do is go test his probes that were taken out of the real water plant, manufacturing facility. We'll show you the photographs that Mr. Babcock reviewed and said, I can't use those. And we'll show those to you. Mr. Pepperman's speaking. I don't want to talk over him.
It's not me who wants him to use any particular probe. It's Nevada law.
No,
and it's not. It doesn't have to be the same exact ones from the facility. It has to be substantially similar. And different probes, which affect the test results, we know from Dr. Babcock's own testing. The older probes were different. They invalidated the results. The results didn't apply. He threw them out. That's the testimony. That's the evidence. And we don't control the testing. We didn't tell him what to do. We didn't do this. We just got his results, and he wants to come in and give these opinions, which, regardless of relevance, are totally speculative.
Do you have an understanding as to how they're relevant?
I don't. I don't understand how they're relevant. The only somewhat relationship to the time frame at issue is in Jason Brown's testimony. If we can go to page 7 of the motion, I'll show you the Jason Brown testimony. So during his deposition, Jason Brown was asked about He was asked about the Kagan and
Kangen.
oxidization requirement. And he's saying, well, yeah, you can use it right out of the box and get some negative reading from it if you're measuring a negative ORP like in water. But it's a slow process without oxidizing the probe. So in other words, it will read negative ORP, but it's going to take a long time to get to that negative reading that you're looking for without oxidizing the probe. And Mr. Kemp asked him, how much longer? He says, well, I don't know. Well, what are we talking? Days, weeks, days, months, hours. And he says, well, hours to days is what I would say. But with regards to positive ORP,
and that's to get to the negative 225 to 300.
we said to get to the accurate reading, it's going to take a really long time if it's not properly oxidized. And so, with Dr. Babcock's testing, he's putting a meter into a test solution that's nowhere near the negative ORP that was used in real water. He's waiting for it to stabilize for a few seconds, and when it does, he's pulling it out. He's not leaving it in for hours or days like Mr. Brown said it was going to take. And that leads to the second problem with the test solution. Because as you saw in the Blaine Jones video, I'm glad we played that, is once you put it in, you see that number start ticking. Tick, 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 tick. And it ticks, up or down depending on the positive or negative ORP of the water. And it takes some time to get there. In Mr. Jones's video demonstration, after he oxidized the probe with the solution that, by the way, they stopped making in 2017 because it's not cancer that nobody uses anymore. Now they've gone back to this vinegar process, but even that is inconsistent and confusing and inadequately instructed, which is one of the main problems here. He oxidizes it with the solution and then puts it in the negative solution, and it starts ticking up. It takes him about 12 seconds or so to get to the negative 180. Well, here, without using the test solution, Dr. Babcock's testing, it takes, I think he had different results, but anywhere from 45 seconds to a minute and a half to get to the negative 115. His average solution was negative 115 millivolts. That he didn't control for the negative solution. It's not like he said, okay, here's the negative solution, I'm going to measure it, and I know I have a target number here. He just made the solution and took the average of what it was. The average was around negative 115. Some were higher, some were lower. But he put it in, and he timed it, how long it would stabilize, and then he pulled it out. He did not leave it in until for hours or longer to see if it would change or anything, or if it would go more negative, or how long it would take to get there. He did not use a test solution that was anywhere near the negative 225 to negative 300 range. And he has no idea what would have happened if he would have used a test solution in that negative range. And again, there's a lot of statements being thrown out on this, but I want to go back to what's Dr. Babcock's testimony. Chris, can you pull up his deposition, volume 1, at page 76?
I just have a question, and you can answer it for me, but I don't know if we know the answer to this, but say hypothetically if they would have kept the probes in for a period of time similar to what real water had done from a production perspective, do we know whether or not it would have ultimately reached the 225 to 300 range?
Honestly, we don't know, because they didn't test it. I mean, we can speculate that because they weren't using a test solution in that range, it wouldn't have reached that range, but I don't know. He didn't do the testing, and that's the point, and that's what I asked him here. I asked him, do you have any opinions on what the conditioning time or the effective conditioning time would have been with respect to reading values between negative 225 and negative 300? the actual conditions at real water. I don't have any reason to believe it would be different, significantly different from what I observed here on the meter, you know? And this testing stabilized within, I believe, between 45 to 90 seconds, depending on how long it was conditioned. I have no reason to believe it would have been markedly different if the solution it was measuring was slightly less negative than this. You know, negative 125 to negative 225. It's still a negative ORP solution. Question. But you didn't do the testing to confirm whether or not there would be any differences on conditioning time with respect to reading values between negative 225 and negative 300, correct? Yeah, I did not test any solutions in that range that you mentioned. The negative 225 and negative 300 millivolts. And I asked them the same would be true with stabilization time. I don't know. I don't think it would be different, but I don't know because I didn't do the testing. And that first is demonstrably false because if you change it from negative 108 or 115 or 148 to negative 225, 250 to 300, it's going to take longer to get up to that number. It just is. You saw the way it ticked up. It's just going to take longer. How much longer? We have no idea. That's all his results are, is how long it takes to reach this negative solution. That's what his big testing is. Again, I don't see how that's relevant to anything, but certainly when you start looking at the negative 225 to 300 range of real water, how does however long it takes to get to negative 115 or 120, whatever the number is, apply in any way to how long it takes to get to negative 225 or above? And what happens when you get past that negative 115 or 120 range? What happens in that time? Does it take an hour or days to get up to that negative 225, like Mr. Brown testified? Does it get up there? Does it drop? Does it stop somewhere and you need to leave it in for a certain amount of time? We don't know. It's all speculation and conjecture about how any of this applies to the actual conditions at real water. And that's what they want to do. They want to come in and they want to bring in a chemist and they want him to say all these things and say, well, we're not chemists, we don't know, you got to listen to him, and he has no basis to say any of this. It's confusing, it's misleading, it's speculation, it's inadmissible under the Hallmark standard. It's plain as day. There's just a few other things that were said that I want to make sure I cover. I thought you asked Mr. Rasmussen some very very good questions. One of them was, well, why didn't the meter at the that was being tested reach the range of real water that are listed in his report? You know, it showed you all the results. Why didn't it reach that negative 225 range? Well, we don't know. One of the reasons can be is that the probe didn't work correctly. Again, I think it's important to note that, and this is a hallmark factor, what were the controls of the testing? Dr. Babcock did not control for the negative ORP of the water. He added, I think, one chemical, I believe it was the potassium hydroxide, one of the chemicals that was in the ingredients list, not all of them, one of them. And that made the water have a negative ORP. But he didn't control what that negative ORP was. In other words, he didn't say that this solution is negative 115, and I need to test it to see how long it takes to get up to 115. That's not what he did.
I think what he should have done is he should have created a solution in the range between 225 and 300.
He should have. And he could have done that. You saw Mr. Rasmussen's chart on Kangen. That was negative 725. Could have used negative 725. But all negative ORP does is you're adding oxidizing chemicals to water to make the negative, the ORP more negative. And so you can create these solutions. You can make them a negative ORP that you're looking for. He didn't control for that. He just created a solution and tested it and then set the negative ORP as the average of what all the different tests were. And so that's one solution, is that the probe didn't work. Maybe it was a negative 225 ORP, or in that range. And the probe just never got there because it's not effective when it's not oxidized. The other solution, the other reason, the only other explanation is he didn't create a test solution with that range. So he's testing a different range, a substantially different range than the conditions at real water, and he's speculating that the testing would apply. So I think that was a very prescient question, and it goes right to the heart of this, and it shows why his testing and opinions are inadmissible. I think another issue is with the titanium tubes. We're not suggesting that he should have replicated the concentrate making process using the titanium tubes. You don't need the titanium tubes to get to a negative 225 to 300 solution. We're just saying, if you're going to try to do this testing and make it substantially similar, one of the things you need is a test solution within the same range as the conditions at real water. They didn't do that, and that is one of the big differences that is fatal to the admissibility of these testing and opinions. There was some comments about real water being negative 25 range. I don't think there's any issue there, but I just want to be clear that the target range at real water was negative 225 to negative 300. Dr. Babcock knew that. He could have recreated that condition in his testing. He chose not to, and that cannot be changed at this point. Finally, there was a comment that Jason Brown was not qualified when he testified that if you don't oxidize the probe, it can take a lot longer to get to the accurate or effective negative ORP of the solution. Well, maybe he's not qualified. I don't know. But he is the general manager of Milwaukee. He is the one answering all the customers' questions about how do I oxidize or condition the probe? How do I get to a negative ORP reading? But the meter's not reading negative ORP. What do I need to do? He's the one providing the answers. He's the one providing the instructions. And so the lack of his qualifications, I don't think that's helpful. It's certainly not doesn't save the admissibility of Dr. Babcock's testing, which was simply substantially different, not substantially similar to the conditions at real water. And frankly, I don't think we're asking for something that's really harmful, because his opinions on the testing are not relevant to begin with. So, Your Honor, for all those reasons, we ask that you grant the motion. Thank you.
All right. I've thought about this issue, and first and foremost,
Your Honor, there's a few things I do need to show that will help, I hope, in this. I understand that you're ready to rule now, Your Honor, but
I'm going to let you make a record, because and you can answer this question. I keep circling back. Why is this relevant?
it's relevant to show stabilization, which is what Mr. Pepperman didn't show you. He suggests to you that it gets to a certain number, and then if you leave it in there for hours and hours and hours, it keeps changing. No, it does not. The ORP meter gets to a spot, it stabilizes at that spot, and it stays there. Number two, he suggests that somehow this ORP keeps going. You can't do that. It's an ORP meter. It gets to a particular spot, it stops, it stays there. That's what was happening. To suggest that you stay there after a couple minutes and then it moves from 188, it just gets like what Blaine Jones was showing, it just keeps going up. Blaine Jones stopped to put the meter down because it was done with the measurement. It's just like if I put a thermometer into my mouth and I try to test what my temperature is of my body. If I leave it there for 3 days, I suspect it could change. If I had a fever and I was running at 103, and I took some medicine, but I had that thermometer in my whole time, guess what? Hopefully, with the medicine, it would go down. These are all materials that will change over time. To suggest that the stabilization keeps moving isn't correct. That's not the science on this. Why is it relevant? We're looking at conditioning. That's all we're looking at. How fast does it take to get to that stable number? We got to stable number 148 without any conditioning of these probes right away. He then says, but you're not using the same probes. The white meters are different than the black meters. Well, let me show you what Real Water had. Mark, show him the photograph of the probes that were at the evidence vault. This is the pH. Keep going to the next one. That's a probe from the evidence vault. Keep going. Keep going. Now we're looking at it. Now, here's what I want you to stop right there. Note this. There's no blue color in that. Keep going. See how much there's no moisture there? Keep going. There's no, in that blue tip at the end, it's not moist anymore. It's been spoiled. Keep going. Keep going. There's no, it's ruined. Keep going to the next one. You had it before. Right there. What do you see on that particular probe, Your Honor? You see what was inside of that white cap up there has leaked out and gone all over the place. It's crystallized. It can't be used anymore. It's spoiled. It's gone. I can't test with it. I can't test the probes they had at Real Water. They're no longer valid. So to say, why didn't you test the ones that we had? Well, I can't because they've been ruined. We showed these photos to Dr. Babcock. He says we can't do that. Which is one of the reasons why we gave him 2 older ones. Said, show these ones. They're outliers. Why? Because when they get to this spot right here, you can't use them anymore. They're no longer good. This is what happens. Or you can't test them. But we're talking about stabilization here. He keeps thinking that it's going to keep moving after that. No, once it gets to a point, it stops. Now, why did we get to 148 and not keep going? Why did we get a test solution at negative 225? We used the ingredients that Real Water used. We used all of those ingredients. And when you use those ingredients, we got to negative 148. What was the one ingredient that we didn't have? The titanium tubes. Would that have taken us to 225? Seems like that's what would have happened, right? But we can't test that because we don't have those. So now you're saying, I use the right solution, minus the titanium tubes. It's exactly the same solution as what was being used by Real Water.
But it's not
because the titanium tubes aren't there.
Right.
Right. I can't test for that.
I understand that, but if there's titanium tubes aren't there.
I can tell the jury that.
No.
The titanium tubes are not there. How do you invalidate the testing that was done because of something that's impossible?
Well, sometimes you can't replicate. I mean, that happens. But my point is this, and I come back to it, I'm still trying to figure out how this is relevant to the designed, the product insert warning issue in this case.
And what they're going to say is that it takes 5 days in which to go ahead and condition these probes. And that solution that he did took him a minute.
Real Water says?
What?
Isn't that what Real Water says?
No, Real Water, Blaine Jones, remember he just put those 2 cups in there and he did it and said 5 minutes and they were done. But Jason Babcock and some others have said, oh, it might take 2 days, it might take 5 days, it could take 3 days. They're saying that's wrong. That was the wrong stuff to say. Jason Brown is not a Hanna employee and not a chemist. He doesn't know how long it takes to do that. So I had a chemist go in there and say, you do it. You use these probes. Tell me how long it takes to stabilize them. How long it takes to get a stable number. And the answer was minutes. Just like what Blaine showed on that video. The exact same thing. We're validating that from what was inaccurate. What they're going to say is an inaccurate reading. That's just not correct. But I can't use the probes at real water. They're gone. I can't use that. And it suggests that why didn't I use those ones? Because of this. I can't do that. My chemist can't use that probe. It's dry. It's done. Right in the instruction manual it says, I can't use a probe that's no longer moist. And all the moisture in that casing right there on the far right is gone. It's outside and it's been done. This is what was in the evidence vault that was being retained by the plaintiff. These are all the probes from real water. I can't use them. I can't do a compare. I can't go test these. They're dry. They're gone. They're old. They won't work. That's not my fault. I did the best I could with what I could. And it suggests that I should be faulted for not using testing because I don't have a titanium tube
Well,
from Russia?
but I come back to my question. How is this relevant to your defense?
Stabilization within a couple of minutes. Not stabilization, then let's just leave it in there for 2 more hours or 3 hours or 5 days and see if it changes any. The answer to that question is, of course it can change. But the ORP meter, the mechanics of it is this. You put it into a solution, it gets to a stable number, you then take a reading from that. Casey Aikens testified, how long did it take for you to get to a reading? 2 minutes. Couple minutes. Literally his testimony. Not 2 minutes and I left it there for 3 days. No. That whole process would be completely done if that's what they had to do at real water. There's none of this 3 days to condition the probe in the test of the jug that's sitting there at the end of the production line. That's not what they did. They didn't just sit there and sit there for 3 days. All right, we just got the process going. Let's wait 3 days. See if this thing is stable. Stabilization happens in a couple of minutes, not 3 days. Think it through just logically. You don't put that mixture in done.
Okay, and I understand your position, but what does that have to do with failure to warn, product insert?
That's not what this is. We have a failure to warn expert, Your Honor, and he'll talk about those things.
No, I'm quite sure you will.
Yeah, we do. This has to do with whether or not the conditioning was correct, because they were able to show that stabilization occurred within a very short amount of time. Not that stabilization took 3 days to achieve. That's not what happened here. That is not the evidence here. What he just suggested is that, remember what we said, we get to the way to the end of the manufacturing process. It's already been bottled. It's ready to be capped. He puts the probe in. He takes about 2 minutes. What's the reading? Oh, doesn't look like it's right. So on that same minute, what does he do? He calls Blaine Jones and says, hey, it looks like I'm low. I don't have the right reading. What should I do? Add more concentrate. That wasn't a 3-day process. That wasn't a 4-hour process. That was 2 minutes. What's the reading? It becomes stable after 2 minutes. We were only showing that's exactly what happened. What they're trying to sell you is a false narrative. It takes 4 days to do this. No, it does not. It takes 2 minutes. And that's what he shows. Every one of those probes, regardless of how long we kept them in distilled vinegar, stabilization occurred within 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
All right.
And that's why it's relevant, because they're going to say, Jason Brown's going to tell you, it takes 4 days of sitting there and unstable. No, these are 2 different things completely. One is stabilization of the probe. That's what we showed. That's why it's relevant. Not whether or not this other stuff that they're talking about. We couldn't test their real water ones there at the real water because they were all gone. They were all ruined. I can't do that anymore. They're finished. They're not moist. Those probes are finished. To suggest that now that I'm going to take all the white ones from real water and test those, can't do it.
All right, I understand.
All right, thank you. Thanks for listening to me. I'm sorry to yell. I mean it more in a loud voice, not a yell. You know me by now.
I've known you for a long time, sir.
Yes. So I don't mean to be rude, and if that's what you're taking.
No, you're not. You're passionate. Yes.
Judge, I'm not saying it takes a long time or hours or more to get an accurate negative ORP reading without oxidizing it. I'm not testifying. Jason Brown, the general manager of Milwaukee, is saying that. That's his testimony. That's the evidence in the case. But regardless, if they are going to say that this is relevant, this testing in opinions is relevant somehow, which I disagree, I don't see it, but if they're going to say that, then what they should have done is they should have gotten the same meters and probes like we got.
Okay, but tell me, is that true about Mr. Jason Brown? That your guy testified?
No, he doesn't know what in fact, he tells Mr. Bushnell, I made a mistake. It's right in an email. I made a mistake. My calibration is wrong. I'm sorry. He says, I did it wrong. He literally says that in the email. We can find it for if you would like. He isn't going to say that at the time of trial either. He's going to say no. In fact, he says in that same deposition, all this affects is how quickly it reads. That's all it does. He's not going to say that. I'll put him on first if you want me to, because he will not validate this.
That's not what I want.
But guess what? Jason Brown isn't going to. The question is whether or not this testing on stability rates, whether or not they're right out of the box, whether they've been there for 3 hours or 5 days, that's all it's going to tell you about is how quickly it stabilizes. That's all it's going to show you. It's relevant to stabilization. Jason Brown is not going to say it takes 5 days to stabilize a meter's reading. That's never been true, ever. They're taking this to someplace that's never been true in the entire ORP industry. There's no way you put a probe into something for 5 days and decide whether or not it's correct or not. That's ludicrous. That's just not right. An ORP meter is supposed to give you a reading within a couple of minutes. It does that. The quickness of that can be affected in seconds by how much you oxidize it, which is what we did with that oxidation thing which Blaine Jones showed you. They had that there. They oxidized it, okay? Well, out of the box, how fast is it? Well, about 2 minutes. Can it go less than, that stabilization happen quicker? Yeah, it can. Is Jason Brown wrong on that? Yes, and he tells us in his deposition, I was wrong on that. And he says it does not affect the accuracy of the probe, it only affects the quickness. And what Dr. Babcock's testing says is, yep, that's true, it only affects it, and the longer I keep it in distilled white vinegar, it goes from 2 minutes down to about 1.5 minutes. It's a little faster. But why would you think about the production? Would we have to sit there with Casey Aikens for 4 days? They've only got 2 tanks there. We're going to wait for 4 days on each tank to see whether or not it moves a little bit or hours and move. No, it's 2 minutes deciding that. That's it. Oxidation. And oxidation has nothing to do with it. Oxidation has to do with, did we get all the salts and stuff off of that platinum probe? Did it peel off as a result of putting it in vinegar? Vinegar comes in, there's an acid, and does what? It takes off those sort of things. It doesn't affect platinum. Platinum's a noble metal. We all know it's like gold. It can't rust. Nothing can happen to it that way. So all it's doing is making sure that anything else that's been crusted on that comes off. That's it.
What's your response to that, Mr. Pepperman?
There's no evidence to support these statements. Wow. Can you pull up the page 7 of the motion? He's saying, oh, Dr. Jason Brown didn't say this. He didn't say this. I'll show you. This is his testimony. This is it. Right there, black and white. They can read a negative reading, but to get a negative reading, it's a slow process without oxidizing the probe. So it'll take a long time to get the negative reading that you're looking for without oxidizing the probe.
No, it doesn't say that. Kangen water, which is not real water. It says it right there. You are now mixing two different kinds of things.
Gentlemen, come on. I can see it though.
But it's so frustrating. It's not even talking about real water now.
Okay, so if this doesn't apply to real water because it's a different test solution, well, Dr. Babcock's does. I mean, that's a goose gander situation there. But what he's talking about is negative ORP. That's the problem with this meter. You cannot get an accurate negative ORP reading without properly oxidizing the probe. And the instructions and the warnings about that are utterly inadequate. That's the claim. Dr. Babcock's testing is not relevant to that claim. Saying how long it may take before it stabilizes for a second and I pull it out at a negative ORP that is nowhere near the negative ORP at real water, using a probe that is not the same as the probe that was used at real water, is not relevant. It's not, there's no foundation to apply any of those test results. It's speculation.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I can't tell you whether Mr. Brown is incorrect or not because it's my recollection. Kangen water had a much higher, right? And so when he talks about this,
Water.
yeah, he said, wait, in other words, Kangen water, customer takes out box, starts measuring negative RP of Kangen water, correct?
So I'm now having to deal with a Kangen water. It's not the real water. And he's going to hold that that's true for real waters too.
Starts with question number 1 up there at the top. In other words, a Kangen alkaline water customer could take it out of the box and start measuring negative ORP of Kangen water, correct? Then the last sentence, without oxidizing the probe, it could take hours to days to get the proper negative reading of Kangen water. That's not real water. We're not even talking about real water here. To use this evidence against me for real water is really unfair. This deposition testimony about Kangen water, what does that have to do? Talk about relevancy. What does it have to do with real water? What does Kangen water have to do with real water? That's not right to be able to use Kangen water against my client. It's not the same stuff. That's just not fair. You want to
Here's my next question, though, and we know there's Kangen water. It has a higher alkaline, right?
That's what it's supposed to do. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on Kangen water.
Okay, but my question is this: what do we know? How long does it take to get a 225/300 reading?
So how long does it take if I had a negative 225?
Yeah,
About 2 minutes.
but how do we know
Where does
that?
that come from?
That's kind of that's my question.
Well, look. We had Blaine Jones, right? He put some concentrate in the water. Where did it get to? Negative 188 within 2 minutes.
Right.
You saw it on the video, right? The
12
same.
seconds. After he oxidized with the solution, that doesn't exist. It
Right.
didn't exist.
But my question is this: but if it takes Kangen water, I mean, I don't. I'm not.
It's Kangen water, Your Honor. It's not my water. It's not the water that's at issue in this case.
Here's my last question. When it came to this issue, do you think your expert should have done a control test?
He did a control test.
But did the control test involve oxidized? I guess not oxidized. Did it involve water in the range of 225 to 300?
He used everything he could to get it there based on the ingredients under ASTM standards, based on the ingredients used by real water. The only difference is we couldn't get the titanium tubes. If the titanium tubes had been there and hydrogen had been there, we'd have gotten to 225, according to my expert. We can't get there without those tubes.
Judge, respectfully, there's plenty of concentrate at that facility. They had access to it. They had access to the same
And it
meters and
degrades.
probes. They had access to the concentrate. They could have used the concentrate to make a test solution within the negative ORP range at real water. They could have used the same meters. They're the manufacturers of these things. They could have at least compared the meters they used to demonstrate that there were no differences between the test meters and the meters that were actually used. They didn't do any of that.
See, here's my question, and one thing we don't know, and maybe, what's the gentleman's name again?
Jason Brown.
Mr. Brown. Maybe Mr. Brown's testifying correctly, and here's my point. This is what we don't know. And I'm customers can take it out of the box and start measuring negative ORP of Kangen water, correct? That's the question. They can. But to get a negative reading, it's a slow process without oxidizing the probe.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, it will read negative ORP, but it's going to take a long time to get that negative reading that they're looking for without oxidizing the probe. Okay, but my point is this. Kangen, yes, but we didn't, and tell me if I'm wrong or not, you didn't replicate the range.
We did not we did not because we did not have titanium tubes, Your Honor.
Because I don't know, I really don't know how this works, but maybe the higher it goes, the slower the reading starts occurring. You know, it's
They
like,
didn't ask that question.
yeah, but
Someone should have.
but I mean, I'm looking here. I mean, that's what I take. That was the response.
Yes, it's negative 725.
Right.
Yeah, we're already at 148 just from our first test. It finished up at 115 to get to 225 within 5%. Okay, remember 12 seconds. Blaine Jones gets it to, with it being oxidized in 12 seconds. It gets to 188. What's the problem? We're within at 188. We're within 1% of the substantially similar. That's what the whole point of this is.
I don't think utilizing the whole range of the meter would be the appropriate way to handle this.
Fair enough. If you want to do that, but we're still
No, but I mean just looking at it from just a pure scientific perspective, because they're not going to go. What's the outer range both ways?
1,000.
Yeah,
So the question really is, isn't it? What you're asking is can we replicate everything that real water did? Of course we can't. I mean, they did so many different things that are not within the ASTM. And then to ask us to replicate, we said, here's the ASTM standards that should have been followed and were followed by Dr. Brown. Here's the ingredients that they had, minus the titanium tubes, and we can do this. We know it's alkaline, and within 2 minutes, we get, just like Blaine Jones did, with no oxidation on it, we get a reading. Stabilized reading.
And do we know if we would have got the same stabilized? Do we know whether you would have got an alkaline reading of 225 to 300 within that same time period?
Yes, it happened every time. Every time there. They use this thing thousands of times and produce millions of bottles, all within the stabilized times of 2, all with ORP meters. Just like that one.
Is that your testimony?
Yes, and not just mine. That'll be Carl Salvaggio, that will be Casey Aiken, that will be Diego Mendigan. They use these every time they filled a tank. They use it, and they got these things done within 2 minutes.
Is that true or not?
I mean, they put out all these bottles.
It's not.
Oh, but now it's not. Well, then we have a discrepancy, don't we? And
Oh,
why
yeah.
would you get rid of testing until you've done something besides just say, oh, that isn't true? Why would they do this? Millions of bottles, you can't do that.
Do we have testimony to that regard?
We do. We have, how many bottles did you produce? This many. Did they use an ORP meter? Yes, we did. How long did it take you to test those? 2 minutes. That's how long it stabilized. All of that's there. And then to use Jason Brown's testimony about Kangen water and say, look, here's the Kangen water. That's got to be relevant to real water. That's not fair. You can't use some other product and say, that's not even similarly, it's not even the same. Not even the same product.
You mean that's not substantially similar?
No, I don't think Kangen and the other are they? They're not.
Bingo.
They're not
That's
substantially
interesting.
similar.
Yeah.
Are they, Your Honor? I mean, let's be honest on that one. Kangen and real water are not substantially similar. And so to use Jason Brown's testimony about Kangen water against me is just not right to do. That can't be the basis of a ruling against denying testimony. I mean, Dr. Babcock has many different conclusions. This is just about one aspect, his testing on this one thing. We have a lot of other things he's going to testify to in this trial. We can't get rid of his testimony on this as well, just because they want to use it against Kangen water. Come on.
Well, I don't think they want to use it. You get the last word, and we're bragging.
All right.
What do you think about this?
We've gone so far outside the narrow issue. They didn't do the testing. If they would have done the testing on the same meter with the same test solution.
Well, they say they couldn't use the same meters because the meters weren't able to be used. Is that true?
So, Your Honor, I think that is a good question, an important question.
Right.
So those pictures you were shown of the meters, those were taken in June after Dr. Babcock did his testing. So whether they could or could not have used the meters, they did not try. They did not go to look for the meters before the testing and say, oh, I can't use these and didn't use them. So that was after the fact that they looked at. Second, there was you were shown multiple pictures from that inspection, and that's consistent. When we filed the case and we were able to get in there and get to the facility, and we were able to preserve the evidence. It's not like we did that on our own. It's not like Plaintiffs said, "Oh, look, I'm going to take this meter and do it." We did it under court order, under court supervision, in conjunction with the opposing parties. We collected the evidence. We preserved it in a joint storage facility, again, under court order, in conjunction with the other parties, and they were available to any party who wanted to look at them. There were some meters that were out and had been in use. There were also multiple meters that were brand new in the box, just like this. So while maybe some of the meters, by the time they were collected, were dried out or incapable of being tested, I don't know. Certainly Dr. Babcock didn't say that in his deposition or his report because he didn't even look at it. But even if that were true, there were certainly meters available, brand new in the box, that they could have used. There were from Real Water. There's certainly meters available. We're buying them. We have them right here that could have been purchased and used. So even if you're not using the exact meter that Real Water was using at the time it was shut down, there were the same meters all there that were available, and none of them had been previously used. They were packaged, so there's no reason why these meters couldn't have been used. But it wasn't done. That's the thing. They did not do it. If they had done it, we would be in a different situation. We'd be able to look at it and ask the questions and say, okay, the testing is substantially similar and maybe relevant, so we're not going to bring this motion. Or we disagree that it's admissible or relevant or substantially similar for other reasons. But that's not the position we were in. We were given these testing. It's clearly different conditions, different probes that, as proven, the data is unreliable as proven by Dr. Babcock's own testing. He threw out test results related to two of the meters that were different because they were older. We know these test results don't apply. We know it because Dr. Babcock's testing proved it. But now they want to come in and testify that, oh, there's nothing wrong with these meters or to stabilization time or whatever else they're going to say. Who knows at this point? Based on this testing that is totally different and inapplicable. And the test solution could have been recreated. They chose not to. We don't know how long it would have taken if they would have used the negative 225 to 300 range. We don't know because they didn't do the testing. And Mr. Rasmussen can say anything he wants to. He seems unconstrained by the evidence. But Dr. Babcock's testimony is black and white. I don't know whether there would be any difference. I didn't do the testing. I don't think there would be any difference. But that is the speculation that can't be allowed in.
I understand the substantially similar what's required as it pertains to the assistance requirement under homework. I mean, I get that. Here's my last question before we go to lunch. When it comes to whether the reading can be done within a minute or two or it takes hours, why does it matter?
It doesn't, in the sense that the issue is that without oxidizing the probe...
Because they talk about, I see here, and this is what he said, this would be Mr. Brown, he says without oxidizing the probe, it would take hours to days to get a proper negative reading of Kangen water. I see that.
Yes. And that's one aspect of it. But the problem is that without properly oxidizing the probe, you get inconsistent and unreliable negative ORP readings. And that's what was happening at Real Water. They were using this meter, and they were getting inconsistent, inaccurate negative ORP readings for the range they were targeting. And as a result of that, they were dumping more hydrazine into the finished product. And that is the harm here. That's the problem. Whether it took them 2 minutes or 2 hours, if they're not getting to the accurate negative ORP reading, which they weren't, because the ORPs weren't properly being oxidized, because the instructions and warnings weren't clear, that is the problem. So it matters if it takes 2 hours to get to a proper negative ORP reading, only to the extent that you're not telling people it's going to take 2 hours, and you're not getting an accurate ORP reading, negative ORP reading. And they think they are, and it is, a lot of people got sick because of it. That's the relevance there. What Dr. Babcock is saying on this negative ORP is not relevant.
And lastly, sir, and the probes were oxidized before testing or not oxidized?
The probes were oxidized at various times throughout the testing, yes. Right out of the box, they were not, because they came right out of the box unoxidized. Then they were oxidized at 5 minutes. Then they were oxidized later at 2 hours. And we did at various times to show all the way throughout that stabilization could be reached within that certain amount of time. So we did oxidize them to show that, and that they were accurate every time. All of the 12, understand what they're talking about. They have 2 probes that are outliers. 12 of them read the exact amount. 2 of them that had been older, had been frozen during shipping, and we knew this, were not going to read accurately. And we say right on the warning, on the box, you can't do that. You can't put them into and subject them to bad temperatures. The plaintiffs did it at their place. The shipping department did it when they were trying to send them during COVID from Romania to the United States. The point is, they were oxidized. Yes. 5 out of the 6 tests were with oxidation. So in answer, that testing is relevant to what he says. They are not inaccurate. They all tested the same amount for that alkaline water at that particular amount.
Anything else, Mr. Pepperman? Then I'm going to lunch.
I don't mean to delay lunch, but there is one last thing. Yes, so I was just sent the Carl Savaggio testimony about the meter that was there with the white stuff on it, and the suggestion that it could not have been used. Carl Savaggio, who's Hanna Instruments vice president and Milwaukee Instruments president, told the customer, quote, "If the electrode has been left dry, soak the tip in storage solution for a few minutes to reactivate it. The white crystals are not harmful. It is only salt, KCl leaking, or storage solution dried up. All you need to do is rinse with warm water and it will go away." So, according to the Savaggio statements, and I believe those were in response to customer questions on the same issue, those probes could have been used for the testing. But again, Dr. Babcock didn't even try to use them or confirm that they were the same.
Let's go to lunch.
What time, buddy? Your turn.
2:15.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. See you. All right. Is now session.
I can do it.
Relax. Yep. I didn't see the emergency power come on, so I was like, wait, that's not right. That's like a spotlight. The show.
I was hoping.
All right, let's go ahead and set forth our appearances for the record.
Pepperman and Teddy Parker, please.
Joe Odou on behalf of the rural water entities.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Jim Neale, Joan Anderson, Nick Hoffman, and David Spurlock for UNFI.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Scott Rasmussen on behalf of Hanna Instruments.
Afternoon, Your Honor. Jim Cavanaugh for Real Water of Tennessee, LLC.
Right.
Robbins from Milwaukee.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Robbins.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Okay. Anyway, I had a chance to sit down and think about what the issue is as far as this matter is concerned. I have a couple of comments before I rule. Number one, as far as the work meters are concerned themselves, I don't think that's a significant issue in this respect, because the work meters can be calibrated, right? They can be calibrated, and that's something that wasn't discussed in a general sense, but they can be calibrated, and whether it was from one batch of work meters or another, I don't think is that significant. However, what I do feel is significant is this. What we know, as far as real water is concerned, let me make sure I get the term of art right. Their negative work measurements would have been from the area of 225 to 300. What the expert didn't do in this case, he didn't have a control group, or he didn't really and truly find how long it would take to measure a solution in that 225 to 300 range. And so the type of solutions that were at real water and were being utilized as far as whatever processes they were going through wasn't duplicated. And the reason why I think that's important is essentially this, and this is based upon Mr. Brown's testimony. It appears to me that the higher the negative ORP measurements for a solution, the longer it takes to get the appropriate reading or the final reading. In this case, the solutions that were measured weren't at the same level of the solutions that real water was producing. And so the test was not substantially similar as far as the solution is concerned. And so my decision is not based upon the meters. It's based upon the solution itself. And I do understand that, for example, Mr. Rasmussen said, Judge, we don't have the titanium tubing. I get that, ceramic titanium tubing, but I feel that before he started, he should have had some sort of baseline to work from, and he didn't have that. And so that's the reason why I'm granting the motion. It doesn't have anything to do with necessarily the meters, because they can be calibrated and so on and so on. But it's not the same measurements.
You know, I have a quick housekeeping matter that Mr. Robbins and I have been discussing over the last couple of days that we can put on the record, if that's okay.
That's fine.
And Mr. Robbins, if I say something out of turn or make a mistake on the exact motion, please let me know. But I believe we've decided, Your Honor, that Milwaukee MIL number 1 would be submitted on the brief. Milwaukee MIL number 2 would be submitted on the briefs. Milwaukee's motion for summary judgment as to proximate causation and superseding cause would be submitted on the briefs. And finally, plaintiff's motion limiting number 21 to include whole causation opinions, failure to include in the original report will also be submitted on the briefs.
Mr. Robbins, is that correct, sir?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay, well, we can go over that to make sure we get it right.
Okay, so Milwaukee's motion and liminees number 1 and 2 are submitted on the briefs, and Milwaukee's motion for summary judgment. Do they only have one? Or?
Yes.
Okay. And plaintiff's motion and limiting number 21 are all submitted on the briefs.
That's correct.
Is that everything?
That is everything, Your Honor. We're trying our best to trim some of the argument down, given that the court's been given a whole lot of factual information to make a lot of these determinations.
Okay, and here's my next question. Where do we go as far as the panel's concerned? Because at some point we have to remedy or rectify the issue regarding hardships and all those things.
Now, I think we're still working on that. Certainly, I can tell you I've been getting prepared for voir dire. Mr. Kemp's office has been putting together a lot of the spreadsheets and charts. I suspect that we'll have to get together soon and agree to some additional hardships. I've seen a few that I think that I can agree to that defendants have requested, but the majority of them, I think, Your Honor, unfortunately, we have to go through this the old-fashioned way and bring most of them in.
And before we do that, I was, my judicial executive assistant right now is going through all of them, right, and she's gonna put them together for me. And, I don't know what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna look at them, cursory look, but, I just might dismiss whoever I think's a hardship, so we can get this done,
We can handle that as well, Your Honor.
you know? Any discussion on that?
Your Honor, just so we're clear then, I believe we have given you panel 1 for sure. I'm not sure about 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Anyways, I'm not sure which panels the court has. If the court's
I have no clue, but Lynn is one of these energetic judicial executive assistants. She was like that as a, you would have loved to have her work on your staff. Trust me, you would have. Because everything would have been well organized.
no, it's fantastic.
You know, that's how she is.
Fantastic. We just, I guess the only question the parties would have is what can the parties do to help further? I'm just not sure that we've given everything.
I believe 1 through 5 that we've submitted. Obviously, the first several groups are going to come from the first set and the second set and everything. And of those, there's not a huge number of hardships that we disagree on. I think the first set is the most. So if the court has time and is going to go through it and is going to dismiss some for hardships, of course, that's acceptable to us. Our concern is just knowing who's going to be coming in the first set and that first day, so we can be prepped to be ready to go on Tuesday.
And Mr. Marshall, how many is that the first day? 60?
66.
66.
So, Your Honor, I've been going through the jury questionnaires that they don't agree to excuse, and I'm just pulling them because there's no boxes checked, and they say that they can serve. So he'll have to review the entire jury questionnaire. If that's the only way he's going to determine what the issue is.
And these are the unagreed upon. Is that
Correct.
How far into it have you gotten so far?
Box number 1.
Okay. All right. How many more boxes are there?
There's 13 total. We haven't got the last 4 boxes agreed upon yet. So I don't pull them.
In terms of the random lists, you have.
I'm going by the random list and checking off those that do not agree.
And you have how many random lists that we've submitted?
5.
Okay, that's my understanding. We're working on the 6th one now.
Correct.
And
then the very last one, the 6th one, the commissioner, I talked to her about it, and because you guys need a little bit more time, she's going to ask that they appear on the 18th. But any parties that are in the 1 through 100 will still have to appear on the 5th if they have not been excused, because they go by badge number. So that'll be the easiest way. And then we just have to determine how often you need the jurors coming in, how many days in between. So, but I'll pull them for judgment.
And we'll talk about it later, but we're in the process right now. Just want you to know that we're taking a close look at it so we can kind of get ahead and be ready for the 5th.
Understood. Thank you, Your Honor.
And we'll talk about it later.
All right.
Anything else you need, Glenn?
No, that's all for now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So where do we go from here?
I think we're on motion to eliminate number 15 pertaining to Dr. Revchek, Your Honor.
It's 19.
Or 19.
Is it 19?
Yeah, 19, correct. This is, I don't call it a new area because we've talked a little bit about it, but it's a different area. So Dr. Revchek's basic opinion, and I'll show it to you in a second, is that there was not an ozone treatment device connected to the filling machine at the Henderson plant. And again, the filling machine is the one that both cleans the 5-gallon jugs and then fills the 5-gallon jugs, which is why it's called a filling machine. So his opinion is that the ozone treatment device was not hooked up, so there's no what they call ozonation. It's not being subjected to ozone. So because there's no ozonation, there was an unknown pathogen. And again, there's no objective evidence of this. I'll get to it, that there's any pathogen. But his opinion is that it, quote, had to have been present, unquote. And let me just show you what his full opinion is. Chris, can I have 24, 23 through 25, 14, please? Getting at the deposition, and I'm asking him to lay out his opinion on the record. So starting here at 24, 23. In your testimony, that it's more likely than not that a specific contaminant or toxin is generated. And he says, first of all, that a specific toxin has not been identified by the CDC, FDA, Southern Nevada Health District, which is correct. No pathogen identified by any of these entities. The only thing that we have objective testing that occurs is hydrogen. So, second question. Well, let me see if I understand this. Is it your opinion that there was a specific toxin or contaminant generated, or is it your opinion that conditions which facilitate the presence and spread of a potential pathogen or toxin? Your Honor, the words that are used both by the questioner and the expert these is toxin, contaminant, pathogen. So they're kind of generic terms meaning something bad. So here's his opinion. Both. The conditions are present, and that's the conditions that would facilitate the spread of a potential pathogen. The conditions are present due to the lack of an ozone generator, lack of a second UV lamp, as I point out in my report. The identity of the actual cause of agent has not been identified. The one, quote, had to have been present to cause this outbreak, unquote. Okay. So the witness is speculating that there was a pathogen. And like I said before, and in his testimony right there, he admits it, there's no evidence. They haven't identified it. No testing has confirmed any sort of pathogen. But he speculates that one had to have been present to explain the outbreak. And he points to the absence of the ozone treatment device. All right, let me just drill down on that point for a second. He concedes multiple times during the deposition, and I'm going to show you 6 more, or 5 more rather. Let me show you 6, that specific pathogen has not been identified. Chris, 25, 1 through 2. That's what we just read, Your Honor. That's his testimony that a specific toxin has not been identified by any of the investigative agencies. Chris, next one, 26, 15 through 25. I have not identified an agent myself. And then he says, but neither has any of the other government agencies. And the question is, you do not know the agent that you think may have been caused by the absence of an unknown generator. Answer is clearly no. Next one, Chris. This should be 2. Yeah. You haven't identified possible agents. Answer, I have not. Third time. Fourth one, Chris. 27, 17 through 24, which is, you're on that page, okay, 17 through 24. Again, that is correct. I have not identified an agent, okay? 40 lines, 10 through 21. Water quality perspective, you didn't find any toxins that can cause liver injury. Questions get a little more specific, Your Honor. Toxins that cause liver injury. Hasn't identified any. and the only one that they identified again was hydrogen. Next one, 144. We focused on the 5 days where Aikens potentially made the super bad batch. And we went down each one of these days with the witness, and we asked him, for any of these days, can you give us a specific pathogen that was supposedly generated? He says no. Okay? Can't do it. That's the 930 batch. You cannot identify a toxin. Next page, Chris. And the same is true of 10-1, 10-3, 10-5, 10-6. We know what days that he made water because there's production logs. So we went through all the days on the production logs, and he says, I can't say whether there's a toxin in any specific batch. Okay. Then I asked him, can you say to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty what toxin was generated? Chris, 55:11 through 56:5. Can't say to a reasonable degree of scientific probability that there's any other, and the others refer to the hydrogen, other specific toxin or pathogen that has caused the agent. The answer is no. Can't identify it. So what we have here is an expert who wants to opine that there's some unknown pathogen that, quote, had to have been present, unquote, because of the ozone treatment. That's what he wants to do. Second problem. We confronted him with the scientific literature on ozone treatments, ozonation, specifically the work by Dr. Rakness and his book on this subject. And there's two different pathogens, primarily, two different primary pathogens or viruses that ozonation or ozone treatment is intended to get rid of. One is called Giardia, Giardia, and the other one is Cryptosporidium, which is I don't know if it's crypto, but I'm just throwing that in there, Your Honor. Maybe it's Cryptosporidium, Crytosporidium. These are the two pathogens that they have ozonization treatment primarily to address. Let's have Dr. Revchak, 29:3 through 25. Okay, so I'm quoting from Dr. Rakness' book. Okay, and Dr. Rakness says, quote, the primary purpose of ozonization in many water treatment places is to achieve disinfection lock inactivation credit for the viruses Giardia, and I guess it was Cryptosporidium at regulated or above regulated levels, unquote. And so I asked him if that's his understanding. He really doesn't have any understanding about this. So he doesn't even know what ozonization is intended to treat, other than, quote, unknown pathogens. The reason I'm focusing on these two is that there's no linkage between these two and acute liver failure. Neither one of these two pathogens, the two primary ones for the ozone treatment, cause acute liver injury. So this guy's hypothesizing that there must have been unknown pathogens, but the two most likely ones don't even cause acute liver injury, Your Honor. Okay, and here's the third, that's the second problem with his testimony. The third problem is that there's no medical causation testimony to link these supposed unknown pathogens to acute liver injuries. They don't even know what they are. So like I've already said, the two primary ones don't cause acute liver injury. So they're speculating that there's some unknown pathogen that causes acute liver injury without a doctor. And that's what Dr. Tanner wanted to do. We discussed his testimony yesterday. He wanted to speculate that it could have been an unknown pathogen. No testimony from any medical doctor that will say a specific pathogen was the cause of the injuries in this case. So we don't have linkage. So all we have left is an expert who's not a doctor, who wants to say that pathogens must have been generated without any evidence. He hasn't found any of them. He can't tell me which one. He can't tell me even one that causes acute liver injury. And the two primary ones, like I've indicated, we've excluded. So those are the three big problems with his testimony. But there's a fourth problem. Why is he saying that it must have been a pathogen? Well, he's saying that it must have been a pathogen because it's his theory that all of the 21 probable cases drank Henderson water. Let me show you his theory. And this is where the must have come from. 63, 9 through 23, please, Chris. Would it be correct that it's your opinion that the deficiencies in the Henderson plant, and again, the deficiencies are primarily the lack of ozonization, deficiencies in the Henderson plant that you've identified in your report created conditions that allowed for the development of the causative agents that cause liver injuries in the 21 probable Southern Nevada Health District CDC cases? His answer is yes, but not just the development, but perhaps lack of removal. I think what he means by that is these pathogens were somehow in the product. They would have been removed by the ozone device. So if the municipal water supply was problematic, and there's no evidence of that, Your Honor. The municipal water supply is tested every year. There's no evidence that the municipal water supply in this county had pathogens in it that were causing acute liver injury. And if they did, why is it confined to the real water people? Why isn't the whole valley suffering from acute liver injury? So he says, if this could have had microcystins, there was no objective evidence of microcystins, and when they sent the retail bottles to Europe's lab, they tested for microcystins, couldn't find confirmation of that. So he says the lack of disinfection equipment would cause such propagation. So his opinion is tied to the fact that all 21 probable cases came from Henderson. And that's just not true, Your Honor. We confronted him with this evidence about Chris Wren. And again, Chris Wren is the first probable case that we talked about in motion for summary judgment number 1. His date of injury, I think, was August 18th or 19th. The water was delivered to him on August 13th. That's well before the Henderson start date. Again, Brent Jones told the FDA that the Henderson start date was September 30th. That's the first production log we can find for Casey Aikens, September 30th. And I'm going to go through the timeline real quick in a second. But so he is, when we confront him with that, in his report, he says, oh, September 30th was the start date, relied upon Blaine Jones' statement and the FDA quotation of it. So that's in his report. But when then I start confronting him with these earlier cases, then he starts shifting. And he starts saying, well, the water could have been made in Henderson earlier than September 30th. Let's have 63, 2 through 23, 21, Chris. So, would it be correct that your opinion that the deficiencies that you identified that allowed for development caused, next page, or bottom, still the bottom of the first. Let's go back up to 2. It was 2 through 21, right? No, I'm sorry. It was page, 2 through 11. Okay, so we're asking specific to the Henderson plan. Where are you at, Chris? Is that the right page? 63, lines 2 through 21. Okay. So would I be correct that it's your opinion that deficiencies, let's finish the answer. Next one. Go on. Indulcil Lowy, you've heard that term, Your Honor, that's the reference to the cleaning machine. So he's saying that the lack of cleaning now is allowing for the introduction of the unknown pathogen. Let's go to 147, 4 through 8, 6 through 18. So he's speculating the September 30th production log. And again, same argument we had on motion for summary judgment, number 1. They say, oh, well, because the Henderson lease is dated August 8th, they could have put all the equipment in there and got water being made before August 13th, the date of the Chris Rand home delivery. Next one, please. It's 163.19 through, excuse me, 153.19 through 154.1. Okay, so he doesn't know when the productions had started, but now he says August 8th or later. So this is a flip-flop. He's changed from the September 30th in his report to August 8th, and the reason he's doing this is he's trying to accommodate the Chris Wren case. Next one, Chris, is 157.24 through 158.15. This is where he specifically says that his opinion is wrong if the 8/13/2020, again, that's the Chris Wren delivery date, the last date of home delivery before he got sick, was not made. Henderson correct? Gives the answer, Chris. So he says it could have been made on the 13th, and it had to have been made for his theory to be correct. Next, go to his answer, Chris. That second one. His answer? Yeah. I think we get an answer finally. Keep going. Keep going. Whoop. Back up. We must have missed it. Okay. Oh, yeah, yes. And it had to have made, the Chris Wren water had to have been made in Henderson for your theory, your opinion to be correct, right? Answer, yes. So this entire opinion that there had, quote, had to have been present, unquote, the unknown pathogen, this entire opinion hinges on the Chris Wren water. And I don't want to repeat everything that we said in motion for summary judgment 1, Your Honor, but I would remind according to the timeline with that, Chris. Pull that up, please. So here's the eviction order. They got it on August 10th. Then the UNFI claims the filling machine is moved on August 10th. Then they got the keys on August 11th. We got the 13th home delivery date. So then the eviction order is rescinded because they paid the rent on the DI facility 5 days after the home delivery. Got Wren being sick, Wren hospitalized, and then 2 weeks. If you use the August 10th date, 2 weeks after that, and that's the time to move and set up the filling machine, August 24th, there's no way that this plant was in operation on August 13th. And the 29th is the date we showed you some production records from Desert Inn that were done by this person named JR. And those had all the measurements, the pH measurement was done on the batch and a bunch of other things. The next day, September 1st, which is 18 days, Akins is called to work in Henderson. So they're theorizing that Akins made a bad batch in Henderson before this time. September 30th, that's the date that Jones tells the CDC and something about the Health District Henderson started. And then September 30th, the day of the first production records. You know, I'm not saying there's not an argument that could be made that, you know, maybe they can backdate this to 20th of September or something, but there's no way they get back to August 13th, right? And so the witness has testified that his entire opinion is wrong if the Chris Wren batch is not made there. So summing up, I think these are the key points. Okay, number 1, medical experts testifying as to cause must avoid speculation. This guy isn't even a medical expert, and he's speculating that there's an unknown pathogen that, quote, had to have been present, unquote. That's never been measured. He can't tell me what the name is. He can't say it causes acute liver injury or not because he doesn't know what it is, but he wants to speculate. Point 2, Chris. He admits they can't identify any specific pathogen. Next one. In this, no one's done it. He hasn't done it. No one's done it. Next one, Chris. So this is his opinion that a pathogen had to have been present because all 21 of the cases came from Henderson. So there had to be a pathogen. That's his opinion. Next one, again, these are the two prime. He speculates that the lack of ozonization, but he has no proof of any pathogen. Next one, doesn't know what pathogens that he's speculating about produce acute liver failure. Doesn't know if any of them do. And then we talked about Giardia and Cryptosporidium. Those don't cause acute liver injury. Next one. No medical doctor is going to identify a specific pathogen for any of these 7 plaintiffs. Next one. No medical causation linkage here. Okay. Next one. And then the basis is that all 21 probable cases came from Henderson. Next one, Chris. And it's impossible for Chris Rand to have come. He admits that if Chris Rand didn't drink Henderson water, it discredits his theory. And like I've already said, it's impossible. So for those reasons, Your Honor, we think Dr. Revchek should be precluded from offering this speculation that there was some sort of unknown pathogen that had to have been present at the Henderson plant.
Thank you, sir.